Thanks, Madam Minister. Really appreciate your address, and clearly all those events we've been living are disturbing and also hitting our imagination and creating a lot of emotions. And I think that's a perfect transition to introducing Glenn Albrecht. Glenn Albrecht is an Australian philosopher, and he's the person who's been inventing the notion of solastalgia. And he discovered this growing sense of environmental distress by studying the impact of open-cast coal mine on the local Australian population. And that's where this concept came about. He's not an end-of-the-world theoretician. He's not an environmental catastrophist. That's not at all what he's willing to do. He's really calling for a revolution of emotions and through the language. And by the way, he published a book called Earth Emotion, and I highly recommend this book to you. Be prepared for new words, for new concepts, and for very, very interesting moments. I would say even for ecological philosophy. That's going to be followed immediately by a roundtable discussion on the theme of eco-anxiety, which is different from solastalgia, and its concrete impact in everyday life, but also at work. And what are the ways out and how to convert this emotion in action? You're going to hear that many times today. Let's move from emotion to action. And that roundtable will be moderated by Tomás Sercovich, our fellow colleague from our Irish counterpart, business in the community in Ireland. This roundtable will be featuring Karen Ackman, a leading expert about eco-anxiety and a practicing psychotherapist. Joanna Krupp, a student in Luxembourg, also witnessing somewhere this growing disarray among young people. And finally, Louise König, CEO of the New Division, who is working on the concept to deal with this phenomenon in the business world. But without further ado, and I see he's there, amazing, because believe it or not, he's talking to us from his wallaby farm in Australia. And he described, by the way, himself like a philosopher. So Glenn, do you hear us?
Yes, I do. I hope you can hear me clearly.
We hear you absolutely clearly, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You and Marie must be very brave to invite a philosopher to speak to you all the way from Australia, particularly remote Australia. It's getting towards 11 o'clock here at night. I'm nearly 70 years old, and this technology that can take me from one side of the world to the other is really quite scary, but it's also exciting. My topic tonight is getting out of solastalgia, and I hope in 15 minutes or so I can get you well out of solastalgia and into something completely new. There are going to be new words. They will be in English. Some of them have Greek and Latin origins, but I'm struggling in my own work to come up with new ideas that adequately explain our emotional response to the world that's changing around us. I'm predisposed to do this because I have a background in as a nature boy. I love birds. I have spent a whole life enjoying a life of immersion in nature. Wallaby Farm, where I live now, is just the latest iteration of this lifelong quest to live a good life as close to nature as possible. As was said, I'm a philosopher, but I'm proudly an environmental philosopher. I did a PhD on Hegel and Marx and organic unity and organic metaphor. So that was an early attempt to speak about nature in philosophical terms. My last job was as a professor of sustainability at Walter Murdoch University in Perth in Western Australia. And I'm now happily retired and have been so for the last 6 years. I live on Wallaby Farm. It's partly cultivated and partly wild. And that land was owned by the Wurrunggurru people who lived and worked on it and enjoyed their lives there for 20,000 years or a lot more. So it's an important point to make that I live on land that was appropriated by the first settlers of Australia from Europe. I'm very grateful to the Indigenous people for allowing me to continue to live in Australia. So what I wish to talk about with respect to solastalgia is how do we get to this feeling of solastalgia. I'll explain more what it means. But how do we get there? What's the major driving cause? And then how do we get out of it? I finished my book, Earth Emotions, by suggesting that it would be fantastic if by the year 2100, the concise Oxford Dictionary in England takes out of its e-version of the dictionary the word solastalgia because it's no longer needed. And so I'm working to create terms in order, in some respects, to get rid of them as well. I don't want to live in a world that's dominated by solastalgia. Well, that world is best described by the term the Anthropocene, which I hope most of you have heard of, but it really is the age of human dominance over all else on this planet, everything that moveth and creepeth on this earth. All of the biochemical, geological cycles are now dominated by the human presence and the impacts that we are having, exponentially increasing impacts over the 20th and now 21st century. So it's difficult to retain a sense of the past, the love of nature when it's being blown up, when it's being exported, when it's being clear-felled. And so we're under a new regime or a new world, which is the subtitle of my book, New Words for a New World. We do need to move from a state of desolation and a state of quite severe distress in the earth being caused under the umbrella of the Anthropocene to something else. I can give you an idea of what the Anthropocene looks like to me. This is the export of coal from the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. It's the empty trains going back to the mines and the full ones going to the port of Newcastle. It's the largest exporting port for black coal or anthracite in the world. And the coal from the Hunter Valley is burnt in the power stations and used in metallurgic, steel making and iron making all over the world. It's a scary place. It looks like that. I took journalists to have a look at it, and that photo is through a barbed wire fence. It's 500 square kilometres of that kind of terraforming. They blow up the topsoil and get the coal in the deep Permian layers below, and then they burn it or export it. In the background, there's a massive power station called Bayswater, which is one of the largest power stations in the Southern Hemisphere. So you can see from that the genesis of solastalgia comes from what the Anthropocene is doing to the earth. So if you want to come to Australia, and I encourage you to do so, there are lots of beautiful places. But if you wish to have a look at the Anthropocene, then clearly that scene of the coal mine in the foreground and the power station in the background is my vision of what the Anthropocene is delivering for us. So the distress that I felt about that, the expanse of desolation that this mining is causing, had a profound effect on me, the young philosopher, reasonably young man in the 1980s. I'm now approaching I'm in my 70th year, so it's been a while studying this issue. And what I'd like to say is that the distress that the earth experiences is also felt in the distress of people, their psyches, their emotions. And so we're seeing, as various forms of earth distress take place, we're seeing mental health distress in humans at the same time. It was that made me think there isn't a word in English that adequately covered this idea of earth distress, of the desolation that's taking place to both land and mind. And that was the reason why I created the term solastalgia. That term is part of a series of earth emotions, and I call them negative earth emotions because we don't want them, we'd rather not experience them. But solastalgia has its origins in the term nostalgia, which was created by Hoffer in 1688. And nostalgia, traditionally defined, meant the homesick sickness that you have when you're away from home and wish to return. It was classified as a medical condition and was thought to be very serious enough to cause major mental and physical distress in human beings. The cure for nostalgia was to be sent home, to be repatriated. These other philias and phobias and various things that are on that list, I haven't got time to discuss tonight, but they're all in earth emotions. And don't get scared about necrophilia. It's not what you think it is. It's the love of death generally. I know it has other meanings. But solastalgia sits inside a whole range of negative earth emotions. And what I would like to say now is what solastalgia means and why I defined it, and how we can then move on from that point. So there are two things that you need to be aware of. One is that solastalgia is the lived experience of negative environmental change. It's got the soul because you lose solace from a place that you previously loved. It's got the soul of desolation. As the land is desolated, so is your psyche. And it's a lived experience because it's happening to you. It's right in front of you. In English, we'd say it's in your face. It's not anticipated, and it's not a state of anxiety, because anxiety is something you will experience in the future that you don't want. Solastalgia is the lived experience of negative environmental change. The bumper sticker version is the homesickness you have when you're still at home, but your home is leaving you. And although it was created as a term to describe the impact of large industrial infrastructure and activity like mining, it applies equally to issues like climate change, because there are many places in the world now, well, it's almost impossible to find a place not being directly affected by climate change and warming. The people who are at home are experiencing floods, heat waves, wildfires, massive fires, the extinction events in the biodiversity around them. So this lived experience is something that's going on at a global scale now. And I would like to be able to turn that lived experience around. Solastalgia has had a career as a term in the philosophical, psychological and sociological literature, but it's also had a career in the last 20 years as a legal concept. It's been taken to court. I acted as an expert witness in court cases where solastalgia was put forward as a reason to reject coal mining. And you might find this hard to believe, but in Australia we've now had 2 successful court cases where, amongst other things, solastalgia was seen as a reason for rejecting a expansion of a coal mine or the development of a brand new one. And that precedent in New South Wales and Australia has now gone global. I've noted that there's a planning application in Ireland for a gypsum mine, which is having already massive impacts on the local landscape. So you can see in that picture that the countryside is being cracked and huge fissures or gaps are opening up. So if the Irish can now see that solastalgia is a relevant consideration when doing environmental impact assessment, when doing social impact assessment, and indeed the whole issue of what is happening to humans when this development is taking place. In the past, in Australia, for example, we were very concerned about air quality and water quality and the impacts on some aspects of human heritage, but very little. And now we're seeing a shift where the impacts on humans are now being put front and centre, up with the economic and industrial impacts. So we're beginning to see that solastalgia is moving from a minor consideration at the edge of our thinking to one which is now becoming much more central. So I'd like to finish on solastalgia by saying that I've argued that we're now in the age of solastalgia, and that means, for me, it's urgent to get out. And the point of getting out is back to the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is such a powerful meme, a cultural replicating term, a concept that's dominating our discussion of the human relationship to the rest of life, that I decided about 10 years ago we needed an equally powerful meme that was the opposite of the Anthropocene. And so what I have done is attempted to create a new meme or an ideology or a scientifically validated era that we could see in the future. So what I suggest about the Symbiocene is that it's the next period that will come in the history of humans on this earth. It's based on the idea of symbiosis, which was a 19th century scientific term to describe the relationship, mutually beneficial relationship between two or more creatures. We've learnt in the 20th century and now early this century that there is indeed a massive amount of symbiosis that goes on in this world from the micro level to the macro. We've even learnt that our gut microbiome is what delivers for us our health. It delivers our blood pressure regulation. It helps with our emotional well-being. So we struck this earth courtesy of our gut bacteria, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So humans need to reconnect to symbiosis at micro, meso, and macro levels. It's where we've gone wrong in the Anthropocene by severing our connections to the rest of life. And it's dangerous to do that because ultimately it's an ecocidal strategy that humans are inflicting on themselves. And the solution, a bit like the solution to solastalgia in a drought, is simple. All you have to do is wait for it to rain. It sounds simple, and of course it's going to be difficult, but we have to reconnect with the rest of life. And the way to do that is to have a meme like the Symbiocene, which gives us a vision of the future that's so powerful that we want to move into it as quickly as we can. So I've created a number of principles that are connected to the Symbiocene. They look complex, but really they're very similar to the sorts of things that people like David Suzuki, David Attenborough, and many other leading environmentalists in the world, people like Vandana Shiva, would not disagree with anything that's on this list. In fact, most of them are so sensible you can't believe that humans do their opposites. Why on earth would you want to use non-renewable energy? Why on earth would you want to deal with something that's not biodegradable? Why did we ever think that putting toxic substances into food chains and the air was a good idea? So they're simple principles that run the idea of the Symbiocene. That what's perhaps new is the idea that we need to conserve symbiotic bonds between and within species, for example, in the soil, within our own guts, our stomachs, our microbiome there. And we need to repair the ones that we've damaged and build new ones, and that's part of being Homo sapien. We need to create new symbiotic bonds, and the role of science in this is going to be incredibly important. So I mentioned briefly all the negative earth emotions that are connected to the Anthropocene, and I'm going to briefly mention positive earth emotions that are going to be connected to the Symbiocene. This shift from negative emotions to positive emotions is action. It's what the motion in earth emotions is all about. So we've got some old ones like biophilia from E.O. Wilson and Eric Fromm. We've got more recent ones that I've created, such as endomophilia, which means the love of that which is local to your area. The geographer Tuan created topophilia, which is love of place. Eutieria is one that I've created, which means a deep feeling of connection, of unity with life, a complete absence of a break or an awareness of the knower and the known. It's what surfers call that feeling when you're inside the perfect wave and you're at one with the ocean. So the negative earth emotions are those that we need to jettison or reject. The positive earth emotions are the ones we want. And so we need to get out of the Anthropocene and into the Symbiocene. And this is where I need to take you now, which is a revolution. We must replace every single toxic and polluting artifact that is being produced in the Anthropocene with a benign symbiofact, which is the job of the Anthropocene. Symbiofacts don't exist, but you'll have to accept that we could make them if we wanted to. So I call it the replacement economy. Everything we're using now, the plastic, the non-repairable, the materials that are toxic, the carbon dioxide emissions from the manufacturing process, they are all things that we can replace, and they can be done without a huge amount of, well, there will be a revolution, but it won't be something that we can find impossible to consider. So we're now thinking about making bricks from life. Fungi turn out to be really good things to make bricks out of. They also repair themselves if you're very kind to them. Other examples include being able to consume the things that we used to be able to just mindlessly throw away. So we're now making coffee cups out of edible material. We're probably going to be milking microbes instead of cows in the future. That image of mozzarella cheese has been produced by microbes, not cow milk. And that's another way that we can begin to think about how we can use the micro world, reconnect with it, but use it in a way which challenges everything that we're doing now. So the idea of using microbes instead of udders is something that is part of the food microculture revolution which is taking place now. Some Dutch students managed to grow a car out of beet sugar and flax. Well, I'm really impressed by people that can do things like that. And we're now making electricity out of bacteria and algae. It's very technical and it's barely able to run a light bulb at the moment. But if we put the amount of energy into that kind of future power supply and stop subsidizing fossil fuels, we might actually get Symbiocene energy within a short period of time, hopefully decades. And we can now see, hopefully, the difference between two types of utopia. There's a tragic one and a good one, and it all depends on how you spell it. The Anthropocene is a tragic utopia, and the creator of the term utopia, Thomas More, defined it as a no place. It can't exist. If you think of the Anthropocene, it actually can't exist in the future because of its ecocidal and internally destructive characteristics. It's everything that we don't want. It's resilient, but it's perversely resilient. It's like a bad smell in the lecture room that won't go away. It's not sustainable. It's degenerative. It's trying to create the whole world in its own image so that every place on Earth looks like every other place. It's characterized by dysbiosis, illness causing, mass ecocide, the solastalgia, and, as I said before, the negative psychoterratic emotions. Think of its opposite, something which is genuinely resilient, something which is genuinely sustainable, something which is regenerative, not degenerative. The replacement economy has a myriad of different features in different parts of the world. Instead of dysbiosis, it's run on symbiosis. And we've got the philias, the biophilia, and others that I've created, which are all coming together as positive psychoterratic emotions. Psychoterratic is simply psyche, earth emotions. So I'm now hopeful, as I'm entering into old age, that generation Symbiocene, which is not just the young kids who are doing school strike for climate change. I was part of that demonstration in Newcastle as an observer, including supporting my own grandchildren. But it's a multi-generational change that's required. Extinction Rebellion exemplifies many aspects of that multi-generational shift that needs to take place. And the good thing is that I think humans as social animals are desperately keen to get out of the Anthropocene and into the Symbiocene. I hope to have convinced you in this short period of time that it is possible, that we could do it quickly. It's actually an expression of being Homo sapien being supposedly a wise ape or an intelligent ape. And the other good thing about the Symbiocene is that entry is free. It costs you nothing to move there. And the other interesting thing about it is once you start thinking about it, once you're in it, you'll never get out again. And so I thank you for your generosity and allowing a philosopher to talk to you from Australia. And as I said at the very beginning, your conference title and my book title are so close together because I think the revolution is emotional, and it's also where it's going to take us to a very good place in the future. So again, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and I am incredibly honored to be here, and I have a luxury of a panel to follow on from such an impressive presentation by Glenn. I'm very pleased to be connected now this afternoon with Caroline. Caroline, I hope you can hear us and see us, hopefully. Yes?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Hello.
Hi. And Christian has already introduced the panel, and they all have very impressive biographies, and I would strongly encourage you to look at their biographies on the conference website. But just so you know, so Caroline is on screen, and then to my far left is Louise, and next to Louise is Joe. So I'm going to have a conversation with them, and Glenn is somewhere around us, so we might bring him in at some point during the conversation. So Christian set the foundation of where we are now, a lot of emotion, but we also want to talk about action, right? Solastalgia, Glenn explained it incredibly well, what a powerful sense of loss because of that lived experience of what we're seeing right now, and those images from Australia are quite hard to digest. But another very important phenomenon is that of climate anxiety or eco-anxiety. And we have experts on that. So Caroline, I'm going to start with you, if I may, because you have led quite an impressive study on climate anxiety. So can you tell us what did you find in your study?
Yes, I will. Thank you. And I don't want to upset you, but I am going to start by saying I think anybody who claims to be an expert in this subject really needs to rethink their expertise. So I really apologize. But I think we have to have the humility and the hubris to understand this emergent psychological distress that we're living with and learning about as it emerges. And humanity has never faced anything on this scale before. So I just wanted to start there and say there is things we know. And we can work with what we know, but we also have to understand that we're discovering things all the time. What we found in our study of 10,000 young people from 10 different countries around the world, we asked them about a range of things: emotion, which we've just been hearing about, but also cognition, thinking, and also the impact on daily living and the relationship with government. So where do we place the fault, if you like, or the blame? It's a clumsy word, I apologize. And the relationality of this. So I'm going to start with one of the most shocking statistics, which was that 48% of these young people, 10,000 young people, told us they were dismissed or ignored when they tried to talk about climate change, whether this was at school or with family or with other people. Half of these young people were dismissed or ignored. That we could change today. When we go back and start to look at the emotion, the range of emotion, and we'll talk more later, I think, about the complex range of emotion. I'll give you a few numbers. We found 67% said they felt sad and afraid, and 62% felt anxious. But there were other emotions like guilt and shame. Half of the young people surveyed felt guilt and shame. And I think that's really powerful, given that they've not contributed the carbon emissions to create this problem. But these young people are still carrying this sense of guilt and shame emotionally. Then if we look at cognition, thinking about how you navigate in the world, how you think about yourself in the world, 8 out of 10 out of these young people said that people have failed to take care of the planet. This was the global figure. But I'm going to give you a few others. 9 out of 10 young people in the Philippines said people have failed to take care of the planet. 3/4 of these young people said the future is frightening. But when we look at the young people in the Philippines, it was 92%. Out of that group, over half of these young people surveyed said they felt humanity was doomed. This was 56% worldwide. So I have to say, what is happening? What are we creating when our young people are left feeling and thinking that humanity is doomed? Now, what's really powerful about this is in the UK, the figure was 51%. So although the young people in the UK are not facing the immediate impact of the climate crisis, in many ways, physically, they're still thinking. So it has an immediate impact, but also a distant impact. That doesn't necessarily change that much. Forgive me, I'm just rattling through a few figures and I'm hoping to just pick out a few of the significant ones. When we asked about relationship with government, 65% of young people felt that governments were failing young people, and 58% felt that governments were dismissing their distress and betraying future generations. The impact on daily living, eating, sleeping, going to school was huge. In countries like India and the Philippines, it was 74%. And then in countries where there's still significant impact, it was things like 50%, less in the UK, because again, we're not facing that impact at the moment. So what we had overall, I'll stop giving numbers, what we had overall was large numbers of young people feeling they weren't being listened to, struggling to communicate with others, particularly with adults, and struggling to help to get adults to understand how that distress was manifesting amongst the younger generation, when maybe they've not got the emotional, psychological defenses that adults have got. And for young people, this was a relational issue. Young people in the qualitative research I've been doing for 10 years have said to me repeatedly, we would feel okay if everyone was taking action. And it's the fact that people are not taking this action and telling us that they're taking action, reassuring us that they're taking action, whilst doing the opposite, which leads young people to feel betrayed and abandoned. And for us in this study, we were able to formulate this as a form of moral injury, that the very people who should be protecting young people are actually failing to do that. So we're leaving young people feeling disenfranchised. I'll stop in one moment. What was extraordinary for me after we published this research was I started getting emails from young people all over the world. The fact that teenagers are sitting down to write to me is fabulous anyway. But I just want to quote a young woman, a teenager in Germany, and I have permission for any quotes that I use. And she said, what this study makes me feel, she said, is I'm not alone with feeling this way. She felt relief at us validating these emotions. She felt heard. She felt she was no longer being misunderstood in that moment. So although we might look at those figures and think this is awful, it is something that we need to pay attention to. I think it would be awful if we didn't pay attention to these figures. And when I've spoken repeatedly with young people about these statistics, they say, yeah, that's how I feel. Yeah, I feel better. I'm not the only one feeling this way. So on the one hand, this is concerning and worrying, and we need to do something about this. But on the other hand, I think what's crucial here is to pay attention to the reality of what young people are left feeling.
Absolutely, and that's a very good start, Caroline. One of the statistics that was quoted quite a lot in Ireland when this report was released was that 40% of people felt they did not want to have children or were hesitant about having children, which just shows the extent. So I might go to Joe if that's okay, because Joe, I think Glenn has called you Generation Symbiocene, so we'll talk about that later. But why don't you tell us? So you are a psychology undergraduate here in Luxembourg. What has been your own journey based on all these numbers and all these new words that you've heard this afternoon? How do you relate to that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the study. Like, it demonstrates and validates all of the emotions I've been going through and sometimes still am going through. So yeah, I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, let's start with my number one emotion towards climate change, which is big worry. I'm coming from a psychological background, exactly, and this is like gonna be one side of my path, and that's why I'm very concerned with trauma especially, and like watching the news, hearing about the catastrophes or just the catastrophic risks climate change brings to humanity. I see the increasing risk of traumatization, and it's already happening. I put a clear focus, or want to put a clear focus in my career on migration. So yeah, I'm kind of like having a strong focus on that also when I'm watching the news, and there's so many people being on a flight right now, or like already in the last decades, and it's just gonna increase. So I see this high trauma load being at risk to even become like more extreme, and all across the globe, not only locally as we can see it right now happening. So yeah, worry is one of the big emotions for me. Shame, as you mentioned also, in terms of we're all part of humanity, and we're kind of the ones that yeah, did a lot of damage to the biosphere, cryosphere, everything. And also, of course, just feeling extremely vulnerable, because yeah, I'm proud of the young people, but it looks like we're all kind of young, so we're all in this together. And yeah, I also feel the sense, like when I'm talking on Fridays for Future demonstrations or other environmental activistic yeah, demonstrations, or just in the groups or associations that I'm participating in, I always get a sense of that people feel betrayed, and I include myself in that, from the government, like in terms of they talk and talk and talk. There are all these big climate action agendas, but nothing is really happening. The news get worse, I feel like. And yeah, so that's on the one side, but also from big companies, maybe also other companies that do greenwashing, and there are not enough like control instances that really like make us, I don't know, trust companies and like the working world. And we're like in our education right now, in our trainings, and like where should we go later? Like what's a good place to work at? Are they just like, I don't know, pretending, or are they really caring about sustainable measures? So yeah, all of that, but I tried very hard to not keep a pessimistic view. Like, it's important to acknowledge the crucial situation we're in, and to not deny it, not ignore it, but also to balance it, like with hope, for example, and an optimistic view, because that's how like new energy is released, and we can use that energy like to direct it towards our goal, which is, yeah, in the Symbiocene, let's say, to live in harmony and in a balanced way with everything that's on this earth. So that's what we're aiming at. And I, for myself, like got a lot of hope and energy from these demonstrations and just activistic group that I joined. But also research like you did it, because it's a privilege to have access also to like read these studies and everything. So once they're like openly accessible for a broader part of the society, that might also raise even more awareness. And then just because I got a sense of community, let's say, because I did not feel like increasingly lost the feeling of feeling like alone and super vulnerable and just helpless and in distress. And then I just initiated a couple of projects. Either I teamed up with other students at the University of Luxembourg, for example, or just when the others weren't that motivated, I initiated it by myself. For example, the Ecosia on Campus project. I don't know if you've heard about Ecosia. It's a sustainable search engine that plants trees, like with not with every search, but a certain amount of searches that you do via this like platform. It's like Google basically, but better. They are planting trees, and not just that. Okay, let's put some tree there and there, but they actually try to also strengthen and support local communities and give jobs to people that need it, also support women's rights. Like it's a whole social business, just to pick one of them. There are a lot of them by now, but this was one where I saw the opportunity to bring it also onto campus because, it might be a way to bring people to download, like students and staff, Ecosia on their laptops, but also down the road, maybe eventually on the university's laptops to have it implemented there. I get some support from some nice people at the university for that, which was nice to see. And people have downloaded it already. And then, you can even track the trees. Like there's a little number, and there's a university track account, even if you download it through a certain link. So it all adds up together. So it, again, increases the sense of community, which I think is very, very important in these times. Or just implementing vegan meals at the university, because I was pretty lost for some time, always just taking pizza without cheese, s'il vous plaît. And now they have vegan options every day, because we send some applications for that, I don't know the word in English, to Restopolis. And for example.
Brilliant, thanks. And it's great to see your journey, and I'll come back to you in a few minutes to see where your journey goes. Caroline, just a quick something top of mind. Obviously, you run a clinic, a psychotherapy clinic. You need to work with people that are undergoing this serious concern. How do you reassure somebody about the fact that we're not going back to that nice place where we were? We're going to something incredibly different. How does psychology work in terms of helping somebody navigate this journey we're on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. Thank you. I think I find myself frequently saying, you're not mad. And there's nothing wrong with you, and the distress and the anxiety, whatever it is you're feeling in relation to the climate biodiversity crisis, it makes sense. And what we need to do is understand how it impacts on you. But actually, I want to reframe eco-anxiety or climate anxiety with people often. I say, look, you feeling this distress or this anger or this frustration or anxiety because you care. If you didn't care about the planet and young people's futures, then you wouldn't feel this distress. And so rather than feel bad about feeling anxious or depressed, you could feel proud of the fact that you care. So I try to reframe it, because this is an act of care about not just yourself, it's an unselfish, and this is what we were just hearing beautifully before, is this relational need to create community and to join together with people and find creative solutions. So I'm never going to go so far as to say that climate change is giving us these opportunities, but it is this transformative possibility where humanity does have creative ways of dealing with trauma and distress. And we are being pushed to find new ways to deal with this, to create new stories for the future. Because you're quite right, we can't go back. It's too late. There's so much carbon in the atmosphere now that we can't sustain ourselves with this fantasy of when we get over this, when we get beyond it, we can go back to where we were before. We can't have that. So psychologically, we have to start to imagine different futures. And that gives us the opportunity to maybe do something far, far different and better to what we had before. And that's where the human rights systemic climate justice comes in, because there was so much injustice in the world, there still is. And the unremitting nature of climate change, there is no escape. People have fantasies, and I understand the fantasies of escaping to New Zealand or Canada or somewhere which would be safer. You know, people deal with some of that distress by thinking, oh, I'll go there. Yeah. Unfortunately, this is, well, it is a global issue, isn't it? So there is no place. So what we have to do is understand that we are not going to resolve this by splitting and separating out one country to another and think, oh, well, we'll be okay here. No, there's going to be millions of climate migrants. We've got to deal with this on a global, planetary scale. And that, in psychotherapy terms, we talk about rupture and repair. We've done something wrong, we've messed up, we say sorry, we fix it. And there is that fixing possibility, which isn't about going back to where we were before, but reparation means culpability. It means saying sorry. And saying sorry to other generations, saying sorry to low-lying Pacific nations, saying sorry to Bangladesh, the Maldives, the countries that are suffering the most, the Philippines now. Yeah. And that gives us the chance to repair something that has been wrong for a very long time, which is good for our soul in the global north. And it means that we're then working together. And I think that's what the COP approach is all about, isn't it? And these sorts of conversations, which is we may be not suffering equally and we're not feeling the anxiety equally. For some people, we can be reassured quickly. Other people can be less reassured. Some people are feeling greater trauma. But everybody can be part of that story and make a contribution to shaping those global futures differently.
Absolutely. And so one connection now with Glenn, systemic, and you spoke about working together, which is a beautiful segue to bring Louise into the conversation. Louise, you have been working in business for all your career to date, and you have been working on a novel initiative that tries to connect us as individuals with some of this big working together. Can you tell us about those inner development goals? Because I think we all know about the sustainable development goals, but not so much about the other ones. So where are we heading?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank all previous speakers also, because I'm really inspired and have a lot of thoughts in my head, and I'm sure that all of you have. So, I mean, we can't disconnect ourselves from what we do. I've been in business all my life. I can sometimes feel like you do, but at the same time, I've been extremely inspired by all the challenges and looking at finding new opportunities and new solutions, and that's why I've been working in business. So I'm going to tell you about the inner development goals, and I brought some illustrations with me, so here the camera people have to help me. So what is the inner development goals? Well, actually, I'm going to start with these ones, and I think you all know them. It's the Sustainable Development Goals that were launched 2015. It was a very powerful creative language that was brought to everybody globally. I think a lot of companies, a lot of corporations, a lot of countries are working with this today. The company that I worked for, the New Division, we were the one who created this creative language, the communicative language for the SDGs. So there were 17 goals, and then came the 169 sub-goals. Normally, I talk with organizations and companies in my work and say, if you don't know what to do about sustainability and how to set your targets, you have them here. So I'm sure you can find inspiration and ambitions to work with. And it's actually here the work with the Inner Development Goals started. It was the founder and co-founder of my company and 2 other organizations that sat down and said, why is nothing happening? Why are things not happening faster? What could we do? Could we create a similar framework for inner development, for people development, for individual, team, and organizational leadership development? And that's how the Inner Development came about. It's a co-creation work together with many different companies, together with many different thought leaders and universities, academia. It's also based on a survey. What kind of qualities do people think that we need to accelerate change in a more transformative way, in a good way? So we came up with 5 different areas: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And then we have 23 skill sets that are needed to drive these individual areas. And I'm not going to go deeper into them, but you can go into the Inner Development Goals website. This is an open source-based material that we launched in this year in spring. You're all welcome to take part of it, to co-create, to become a partner, to become a learner. We are working a lot with big companies, currently in Sweden, companies that you know, Spotify, IKEA, Ericsson, etc. So they have started to implement the work and see how this works. So what does that actually mean? Working with being. It's about how you develop your self-awareness, how you develop the relationship to yourself, how do you develop as a person, as a leader. Thinking, that's about how do you develop a critical thinking perspective? How do you drive the development of perspective seeking? How do you drive your idea of visioning and long-term thinking? The relating is about how do you relate to other people, to other stakeholders, to other generations, to the biosphere. Collaborating, how do you develop your social skills? How do you develop communication, co-creation, ways of working together? And acting, how do you drive a more courageous leadership, a more inclusive, your integrity, change, perseverance? And I would say that if you combine the SDGs with this framework, and then we put them together so nicely like this. And here is the symbol that is not launched yet. I'm showing it to you here. For me, and when I work in corporate life and as a consultant and with the companies, it's basically being able to have the same language, to have the same platform. We're seeing that in companies, I won't mention the name, I don't think they would be comfortable with that. Actually, the co-workers are working with the managers. They are working with the C-suites. Now they have a language to challenge, to explore. Are we doing enough? When it comes to sustainability, are we doing enough in relation to our size? So I think that we're creating a common language and we're exploring this. So the SDG and the IDG are 2 platforms that are open for everyone. It's not going to be taken over by the United Nations. They are very positive about it. And the European Commission this summer said that this is something we're going to involve in all our policy work. And so you are welcome to collaborate with us on this. And I think that there is one country that has been very courageous, and that's Costa Rica. When they saw the goals, they said, we want to integrate this into all our public policy. We want all our civil servants to know what this is about so we can accelerate and drive our sustainability ambitions for our country. I feel ashamed that my country, Sweden, have not signed up yet. We have a new government that most certainly will not be the first one to sign up on this, unfortunately. We are in the same league as Italy since a few weeks back. But I think we have a great opportunity to drive this on an individual, on a team, organization, and leadership scale. And I would really also like to say that I think everybody sitting here, if you represent a company, organization, or part of the ministry or politicians here in Luxembourg, we can do more. We have to do more. And I'm very inspired by the speakers earlier today, and I will go home and try to do more. And I would like to also inspire you to maybe look at an example in Sweden right now, in the north, where basically we have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of all kind of raw material infrastructure, steel, wood, etc. And now we've decided to go for zero emissions, fossil-free steel, chalk, cement. The more difficult the challenge, the more creativeness we're seeing. So especially, I would say, corporate life, but also the politicians. There is really something happening here in Sweden, and I'm really proud that we're kind of accelerating and working according to this. So that's what the IDG, the Inner Development Goal, is.
Fantastic. That's really interesting, Louise, and it's. I really connect to the areas around collaboration and relating. Obviously, it is very important. But I mean, you've been in business for a long period of time. This is a decisive decade where concrete, real, radical, I think we were talking about last night, action has to happen. What do you think is going to trigger that meaningful change? Is it us, people? Is it coming from the corporations?
Yeah, I think actually when you mention collaboration and the aspect here also in the IDGs, that's also about, are you collaborating? Sweden, are you talking with your worst critics? Are you talking with the indigenous people? Are you talking with the young people? So I think there is a great opportunity there. And as a sustainability manager, I would like all CEOs in the room, if you are here, or bring it back to your CEOs. You know, we talk about business to business. We talk about business to consumer. That's how we are oriented in our business life. I would like you all to bring with you that you should think about being business to activists. What do the activists say? What do they think? What do they feel? And you need to bring out the activists in your CEO and maybe foremost your CFO. They're the ones sitting on the money. But I think that here is really something. So we don't lose the connection between the brain and the heart, the motion and emotion. You know, you need to have a very fast elevator between those two organs. And here I think more has to happen. And I think that unfortunately, corporate life is accelerating, but they are not connecting it to the emotional aspect of business or of life. And all action is emotional, all action. So we have science, we have engineers, we have structure and processes, but if we don't connect to people how they feel and how, you know, the behavioral change we need to see in the world, we're not going to make it. And we're really in a hurry. So that's my answer to you. Perfect.
Thanks. That's a good segue as well. And Joe, if I can come to you, because you've been hearing a lot about some of the road ahead. Yeah. So as you know, the younger generation, I know it's not good to put just you on the spotlight. As you were saying earlier, we're all part of that next generation. How do you feel about how your generation is going to carry that journey, that it's transformative? Yeah. Radical, and let's be honest, difficult.
Yeah, and I think you captured it very well, the two of you already, because as much damage as has happened already, there's such a big opportunity for a shift at the moment to also really expand everyone's consciousness. So it has such great potential. And I mean, we all know, maybe from our personal lives, that when we could really create change, either in our closest environment, on a big scale, or just in ourselves, like when we felt the most authentic, we had clear intentions. We acted like from our heart, but with clear intentions. So the connection here was there, and we could really cultivate like a hopeful and optimistic like attitude, while at the same time being very mindful and considerate and goal-oriented in our actions. And I think this is, what's gonna be leading us and guiding us for the next decades and hopefully much longer. So to connect to the world around us. I think collaboration, I see it in terms of like connecting, like that's also like, of course, when you're young, like it's all about making connections, like expanding your network, expanding your consciousness, and just at the same time, while we're doing that, all of us, we should always try to expand our capacity for compassion, no matter in what we're working and what we're doing in our personal lives, whatever. And from that place, I think, on an individual level, on a collective level, then the subscales, let's say, research level, business level, we can really create change, and that's what's needed.
Absolutely.
What you wanted?
No, I just think that I think sometimes it's also a little bit, I'm not really happy about saying that now she's going to take over the work when I become a retired person. I'm not going to retire for a long time, and when I have, I'm still going to work voluntary probably. So let's do this together.
Of course.
Let's work, intergenerational. I think also all organizations. I worked a lot for old organizations that are maybe, we have companies in Sweden that are 400 years old, and they say we want to become 400 years,
more
older.
Yeah.
Then I say, okay, what is your 100-year plan? So I think everybody here, normally they're driven by 3-year plans or 5-year plans. Set 100-year plans and start to talk to all generations, older people and younger people, and let's do it together.
And integrate it all together.
Yeah, and then I also think I just not only thinking and feeling, it's like, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
I think that there is really, a lot of people have things in their head and their heart. We need to do things together. We can't change. So I think that's really important, the message also here today.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also, I'm not sure who's sitting in front of me exactly, or in front of their computer at home. But just from what I hear, and also what I believe myself or search for myself, in what working place I want to work later. It's really difficult right now. We're already looking at the possibilities that we have or might have, and everyone just really that I talk to. Of course, I'm in a bubble. I'm in multiple bubbles, but it's still a bubble, so I'm not representing everyone here. But the ones that I talk to and can represent are searching for the real value and meaning in what they're doing. So it's not just about numbers and money and just having this mindset. Okay, let's just go growing, but really it must have a meaning and integrity and transparency and ethical responsibility and initiative. That's what the people, the young people, are going to search for in businesses and companies and other workplaces. So I think this is really important to note here.
Great. Thanks both. I think we're getting to some very, very exciting space, intergenerational. We hadn't thought about it. When Carl and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about Japanese philosophy and that long-term way of thinking that Japanese companies have on society, which is really exciting. Glenn, I wonder, is Glenn still with us?
Yeah.
Yes. Glenn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still with you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we're keeping you away from your bed. It's so late over there. Glenn, can I ask you? You're calling for a revolution of emotions, and the question is, how do we scale that revolution of emotions? How do we set that in motion? Abusing the words of this afternoon's session.
Well, look, I'm a philosopher, so I'm not going to give you a carefully choreographed map or plan of how we get this revolution going. My contribution has been to argue that part of our problem is that we didn't have, and still don't have, an adequate language to describe what it is that's going on. It was mentioned earlier that the scale of the problems that we have now are so great that humans have never experienced them before. We're seeing cultures all over the world struggling within their traditional languages to even account for what's going on in their part of the world. I always give the example of the Inuit who have had to use a cultural word, ugianatuk, to describe what's happening to their climate, because the climate is changing in such a way that it's described as unfriendly. And ugianatuk used to mean only a problem that you had with a close friend who was beginning to act strangely. And so if the Inuit don't have words for this bewildering distress that we have when something familiar, something which was patterned, something which was regular begins to fall apart, then the rest of us are in trouble as well. And so that's why I created Solastalgia, was to, distress is a very general term and it applies to a million things. Distress related to the state of the earth is more particular. And what it does is it enables people to share their distress, to identify the cause. For example, in my part of the world, it was mining supported by the state and national government. They could then share their stories of distress because they've got a common language for it through solastalgia and other earth-related emotions. And then they can do something about it. So that's why I mentioned those issues with the courts. Yeah. The courts are usually 10 years behind everything else that's going on in society. But in the case of the response to our emotional response to environmental degradation generally, we're beginning to see different cultures doing it differently, but different generations entering the court system and asking our judicial system, which is independent of government, to start making decisions about or interpreting law so as to protect humans from other humans. And so the revolution, if you like, starts with understanding our predicament through language, and language is core to how we understand our world, and then start shifting where we can. And so I work closely with lawyers, and that's, as I mentioned in my talk, has been reasonably successful, even getting, to Ireland. I hope you enjoyed the connection. And so the revolution is not something which you can just say, we're planning it and it's going to happen. I gave examples of Extinction Rebellion. You might not like everything they do, but they're certainly changing people's understanding of their relationship to home at all scales. And so we're beginning to see a shift there. And certainly School Strike has got very young people, young teens, mid-teens, already highly aware of what the issues are that they're facing. And it was mentioned that this is an ethical or a moral issue, that how could the older generations continue to do what they're doing, knowing full well that it's cutting off the life chances of their own children and grandchildren? That's a really bizarre state that humans have got themselves into. And so this idea of the revolution being emotional, of course, it has to be multidimensional. But I started with the emotions because I could see that there was no place in our language, no place in our courts, no place in corporate documents about corporate responsibilities about, well, how do we protect and look after the relationship between a person's sense of place, their emotional love of place, and the things that humans are doing to make a living or to make a profit. Yeah. And because there was nothing there, you had to start from scratch. And so I think we're living in such novel times that my contribution as a conceptual philosopher needs to be matched by artists and creative people, musicians. We had a great example of that at the opening of this event. So creativity is not confined to one area. It's the one amazing thing about humans, that we could say that creativity is itself revolutionary. Yeah. And so my work has been picked up by artists of many different types and creative people of many different types, because they are looking for a language to share their emotional experience of the world. And so from emotions to motion, it's exactly what I've been doing.
Super. Thanks, Glenn. I see our artist is in place, so I think that's the sign and the clear signs that we need to bring this conversation to a close. And I'm really sorry, because we had probably one more question to share with everybody and way more, but I'm going to bring the conversation to a close and just give a huge thanks to Caroline, to Joe, to Louise, and to Glenn again, and everybody for joining us this afternoon. This is only the beginning, but I feel much better now in terms of all the actions and going definitely from emotion to motion. So thank you very much.